Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, when Hans finally caught up with Clara and the rest of the pack, the girl didn't bother to ask Hans why he was now in his wolf form, as he let her and Pavlova ride on his back, as the rest of the pack followed the golden light that used to be Louise's wolf form, back into the den, in the hidden cave where Louise's sleeping human body lay. Once in the cave, Louise's wolf form's golden light returned to her body, and a bloody wound appeared over her heart. "Louise!" Clara trailed off as Hans let her down from his back, as she hurried over to her sister, whose breath was becoming shallower by the minute. "Sis, no! Please breathe!" Clara cried as Hans and the pack and Pavlova approached the two sisters. "Can you heal her like you healed me the other day?" Hans questioned desperately. Clara paused, looking at the terrible chest wound over her sister's heart. "I've never attempted to heal something this bad before. I need time," the girl started, but was cut off when they all heard a gunshot in the distance, meaning that the king and his soldiers were approaching the den, fast. "I'll buy you some time, Clara. Try to heal Louise. I'll hold them off," Hans stated determinedly as he rushed out of the cave, after telling Pavlova to stay with Clara, who watched the boy she cared for run off out of her cave. "Follow him. He is your alpha tonight," Clara told the wolves, who then followed Hans out of the cave. Chapter 5. Hans could smell the king and his forces drawing nearer to the den, but there was just enough distance for a solid sneak attack. "We can drive them back. We are wolves. They have a cannon, arrows and crossbows. But don't be afraid. They're in our territory. Take cover in the trees. Make those awful men spring their own traps so they get caught. Draw their fire as you sneak closer, and then strike and frighten them away within the shadows as they're reloading." Hans told the wolves as a general commanded his army, and the wolves did just that. The attack went smoothly. Nearly all of the men that had accompanied the tyrant king had either fled the forest that was now rapidly catching fire from their torches, or being held upside down by the snag traps intended for hunting. "Report!" the king commanded for the third time, but all he could hear was the remaining men begging to be released from the traps. "Idiots!" the king grumbled as he turned back on his horse with Eric silently chained to the saddle, who used his sword to free his remaining men. Meanwhile, back in the den, Clara tried her best, but the wound only reopened on her sister's heart after every attempt she made to heal it. "No! Please, sis, tell me what to do. I'm not strong enough on my own," Clara cried when suddenly she remembered something Trudy told her about a wolfwalker's healing capabilities, long ago when she was around 8 years old. "Regular wolves have healing powers like us wolfwalkers?" little Clara asked while petting a gray wolf that was part of her main pack. "Yes," Trudy replied. "You see, little Clara, when a wolfwalker needs to use their healing powers on a near-death wound, we can channel that power through our wolves as they howl like us when we are trying to heal that wound. However, it is difficult if it's only one wolfwalker doing so." Clara frowned in determination at the memory. "The pack. I need the pack." Hans and the wolves watched as the forest was catching more fire by the minute. "We've only stopped them for now. There must be something else we can do," Hans thought to himself when suddenly, "Ow!" The wolves and Hans turned to hear Clara calling for them in the den urgently. "Let's go," Hans ordered as he and the pack began to sprint towards the den, running past the king's horse. Eric gasped as he held Hans' sleeping human body in a protective manner. But as he watched the wolves pass him and the king, one familiar wolf stopped to stare at him. Eric gasped. When he blinked, his eyes closed. In the place of the wolf, he saw his young cousin, breathing in the same rhythm as the wolf itself. "Hans," Eric said in wonder, glancing from the boy's sleeping human form in his arms to the wolf who smiled at him at last. But it didn't last long. The king saw the wolf and tried to use his crossbow to shoot it, but Eric was too quick for him. He pushed the king's weapon off course, making the arrow narrowly miss Hans by a hair. "Hans, go!" Eric shouted, making Hans run back to the pack as they drew nearer to the den. "That's it! The devil's den! Ready the cannon!" the king ordered the men who were now free from the traps. Hans gasped when he heard this. "Get to Clara, I'll handle this," he told the pack as he turned back to the king and his forces, just as the king himself lit the cannon pointing to Clara's den. Hans, no! Eric yelled at the top of his lungs as he then held Hans' sleeping human body close and hid behind the king's horse. But it was too late. Hans' wolf form jumped onto the edge of the cannon, making it point downwards, away from Claire's den, just before it exploded. After the smoke settled, Eric then noticed Hans' sleeping human body had bruises on his arms and one small cut on his left cheek. Oh, dear God, no. Hans, wake up! Wake up, please! Eric begged as he hesitatingly looked over from behind the knocked-over horse to see Hans' wolf form unconscious, closer to the den on the other side of the crater of the cannon's blast. Everyone, over here! I need your help! Claire cried back in the den when the pack entered. Wait, where's Hans? She asked the pack as one of the wolves came forward and whimpered, making Claire's eyes widen. No! Is he mad? Is he... Claire started but stopped when a massive explosion was heard from outside, making the walls of the cave shake. Claire then held on to her wounded sister, who was unconscious, until the shaking stopped. Pavlova, please go find Hans, and pray that he is all right. Claire trailed off as the kitten gave her a nod and left the cave to find her boy, while Claire turned back to her sister to try once more to heal the deathly wound on her chest. Hans, get up, please. You can do it. You came this far, please. Eric called out to his cousin's wolf form. That's when he noticed the king seething with rage as he approached Hans with his sword at the ready. Hans, get up, run! Eric yelled, trying to break free of the shackle on his neck. Enough, you useless pawn! This wolf must be dealt with for thwarting my plans! The king shouted in sheer rage before turning back to Hans' wolf form. By my hands I vanquish thee! The king whispered to the wolf darkly as he raised his sword above his head, preparing to strike the wolf before him to death. Hans! No! Eric growled at the end of his sentence as just as the king was bringing down his sword. He and his weapon were charged into by a large mass of black fur, knocking both away from Hans. The king gasped at what he saw. A black wolf, larger than Hans, was before him with its teeth bared, staring at him with familiar, determined brown eyes. What the hell? The king questioned as he then snapped out of his shock and grabbed his sword, getting ready to fight this new foe of a wolf. Ugh. Hans' wolf form groaned as he was awakened by Pavlova meowing beside him, urging him to get back up. Pavlova, what? Hans started, but then he gasped when he noticed the king fighting another wolf. It can't be. Hans trailed off as he looked back to see his suspicions were correct. Eric was asleep with cuts, and the cuts that he was getting from the king's sword on his wolf form were slowly appearing on his human body. Louise bit him back in the village. Of course he's a wolf walker now, Hans thought to himself in realization. Eric's wolf form growled as he lugged at the king, pinning him to the ground. But as the king himself turned his head away from the growling wolf, he saw Eric, who was asleep against the unconscious horse, had the very same wounds that the wolf had before him. Witchcraft, he whispered to himself as he carefully took a small dagger out of his boot and swiftly tried to stab Eric's wolf form in the heart. But the weapon was forced out of his hand by an arrow that emerged from behind the wolf. Both the king and Eric's wolf form turned to see who had shot the arrow, and both of them gasped in shock. Hans, who had returned to his human body, held an empty crossbow in his hands, while Pavlova was hissing at the scene from the boy's shoulder. With the wolf before him distracted, the king was able to get up and run towards the exit of the den, which Eric's wolf form angrily followed him. No! The king trailed off as he hit a dead end, realizing the rest of his men had fled as well. The king then glanced at Hans and his cousin, who were both staring at him coldly. And then he began to laugh like a maniac. You think you've defeated me? Ha! I will never let anyone do such a thing. So, the king trailed off as he picked up his sword once more, making Hans and Eric's eyes widen in shock when they realized what the king was planning to do. I'll see you in hell, witches! The king shouted at the top of his lungs as Hans began to run towards him. No, don't! The boy yelled, but it was too late. The king had run his sword through his chest in a matter of seconds before Hans was able to reach him. Hans stopped dead in his tracks as vultures cawed and landed before the now dead king. He was mad. The boy trailed off in shock. That was when he and Pavlova heard whimpering from behind them. Hans turned to see Eric's wolf form approaching them with a nervous smile on his face. "Eric," Hans gasped, but then he smiled as he ran over to his cousin and hugged him. "Oh, cousin, you're one of us now," Hans said happily as Eric's wolf form nuzzled his head. That's when the boy remembered there was still something that had to be done. "Eric, we have to help Clara," Hans stated, looking back towards the cave. Eric's wolf form nodded as he let Hans and Pavlova climb onto his back as they ran into